Welcome everybody to the last Thursday seminar in this academic year. We have very special guest today, and Eyal, I give word to Jakub for a couple of words.
Which is very shortly. Eyal is an economic theorist, has made contributions to game theory and general economic theory. He has a formal facet of himself when he does a technical mathematical contributions. Today, he will talk about the section of psychology and game theory. So Eyal has this kind of a more intuitive part of game where he would like to contribute a broader understanding of things that I think makes him compatible to this research center. And an interesting thing about Eyal is that he has been a director of a successful counterpart of CTS, Center for Rationality in Jerusalem, Hebrew University. So he also understands how interdisciplinary centers are run, how they work, and probably he will give us some nice insights about that over the lunch. Roman has mentioned that he knows you from somewhere. So nice memories.
Yes, but you know where?
That will be a lot.
I will say something about this type of situation. I don't know where.
So the talks here are very interactive. People will ask questions, and this is why they take 2 hours. So it's about we will go after lunch.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Jacob. I'm very delighted to be here and presenting that. I prepared indeed something which will be interdisciplinary in a way, not in a way that I will present something that everybody, including people from humanity, will understand all the lecture, okay? But have parts of the lecture that appeal to, or large parts of the lecture that appeal to basically to everybody, but parts that are more earmarked to people who go more engaged. Okay, but I'll describe the overall issue, right? The overall issue is the link between behavioral economics and standard economics, okay? And I'm sure all of you know something about behavioral economics. This is the interface between economics and psychology. And most of what it does is alerting us at situations or phenomena in which people are sort to say behaving irrationally. Okay, and they're giving a lot of examples, starting with loss aversion. Loss aversion refers to a situation in which you suffer much more from losing something than the extent by which you enjoy gaining the same amount of money. Okay, the bad things hurt us much more than a similar good thing make us happy. Okay. Overconfidence, that are referred to people being very often overconfident. Inequality averse, they don't like inequality, and especially they don't like it when they are the inferior part in this inequality. Reciprocity seeking, they are looking for situation in which there is reciprocity, right? If you do a favor to somebody, you expect the other person to do a favor to you. Or if somebody has done something bad for you, then you are endowed with some level of wanting to retaliate. Regret, you may regret your decision. Fear of regret, which is even more important than regret. The fear of regret is what happens when we regret things. We make decisions in a way to avoid regret. And often these decisions are very much incompatible with rationality, or what we should actually do in order to be better off, okay? But what they don't do, or very rarely do, is asking the question, why? Why do we have loss aversion? Why do we have overconfidence? Why do we have inequality aversion? Why do we seek reciprocity? Why do we have regret or fear of that? And I wanted to enter precisely in these aspects.
I think like dating is like one, it's like very special, like part of the world. And it's like, okay, like what's the difference in dating? Like, is it necessarily like that it's like everywhere else? I think people work on it's interesting problem.
Okay.
If your definition of that one is just based on dating.
No, I think it's a good way to realize how your emotions are guiding you.
Yeah. So in this line really gets into the discussion here. What behavioral economics very often tries to do, which I think wrongly, is to tailor the utility function, right? Is to say, okay, we see people behave in what seem to be irrational. Let's change their utility function and make their behavior rational. Okay, and this is very problematic, because by doing that you can sustain every sort of behavior as being rational, including committing suicide. Right? It's rational because being dead is better than being alive. Right? I mean, you can rationalize everything. Okay. And this is where I want to depart, and you basically cannot depart from that unless you invoke a certain degree of evolutionary argument. Okay, so this will enter. Okay, so standard behavior in economic theory introducing biases by exogenously into the utility function and investigating their effect on equilibrium behavior. My approach is deriving biases endogenously as part of equilibrium behavior. Okay, so I'm going to ask basically, how can I sustain this behavioral phenomena as an equilibrium outcome, based on the case that my individuals are concerned only with material payoffs, okay? So what eventually they will maximize are material payoffs, and these material payoffs would be synonyms for evolutionary fitness, okay? And I'm going to do, for example, I'm not sure I'll have time for everything. I'm going to talk about endogenous preferences. I'm going to talk endogenous rule of thumbs, about endogenous beliefs. And recently I also worked with Joe Halpern and Yuval Heller on endogenous categorical thinking, okay? And what I'll do, I'll briefly describe basically the philosophy of each of these papers as much as time permit. And then I'll move to a related approach or a related methodology, which is experimental, because I was also involved in running the experiment. That's my interdisciplinary part. I work with people from neuroscience and psychology to try and either find support or refute hypotheses that my models are asserting, okay? So let me explain the endogenous approach, the overall. The basic idea is that strategic environment, preferences and cognitive limitation, even moral sentiments or belief, all of these are not exogenous, as we are used to think in standard economic models. Their departure from rationality is not arbitrary. There are some purposes in various preferences or various biases, because they contain some long-term strategic advantage. Okay, so that's a basic idea. And this strategic advantage or the bias itself, we acquire it either by evolution or by learning many situations. I'll give you already one very prominent example of the ultimatum game, right? I mean, the ultimatum game is one of the most prominent experiments in economic theory due to Bernard Wood. You take two individuals, you give one of them some money and you ask, make an offer to the other one. If the other one accepts the offer of how to divide that, let's say 100 euro, then you divide it as you proposed. If he rejects the offer, I'm going to take the money and you get both nothing, okay? And game theory, of course, would suggest, or the idea of sub-imperfect equilibrium would suggest that the proposer should offer maybe €1 to the other party, because €1 is better than nothing, and take 99 for himself, okay? And this is obviously not what happens in the lab, okay? And then people were starting to ask, why are people behaving like that? So my approach would say that the rejection, most interesting aspect is rejecting like even 10 or 30 euro out of the 100, right? Willing to leave money on the table rather than taking a humiliating offer, okay? So my approach would say, listen, people experience negotiations all the time, right? If you are somebody, if you develop a reputation for yourself as somebody that accepts every offer just because it's better than leaving money off the table, at some stage you'll be exploited. So evolution or learning developed a trait in your personality that tells you no matter what the circumstances, I'm not going to accept low offers. Okay, and if the other party knows it, and it's important that the other party knows it, and I'll talk about this part of the assumption in the model, then you are better off by having this trait. Yes, Johnson.
Those lab experiments is carefully done so there is no reputation of effects. Those people are only listening to navigate again and again. And so yet people reject humiliating offers. So the experiment is designed in such a way that you can shade off.
You can't shade it off totally. You can't. It's in the back of your mind.
So I'm asking, is there a story like an evolutionary misadaptation to that rare situation where the reputation doesn't play a role? So the evolution is kind of experiencing something that wasn't designed for. So is it a misadaptation story?
Yeah, it's a misadaptation story, very similar to the misadaptation story of feeling pain when you break your arm. When you break your arm, pain is a very important evolutionary mechanism for survival. But when you break your arm, you don't need it. You know that you broke your arm, okay? Evolution didn't take care of it. Maybe in a million years it will, but
it would distinguish between misadaptation and mismatch, because this is clearly a mismatch situation, because we are well adapted to situations that reoccur frequently, and this super artificial situation where your decision doesn't influence your reputation is just like was there during the last 60 years in the psychologist's lab.
Why was it that you somehow not need it? Because when you are using your hand afterwards, you are damaging it.
But maybe well, maybe it's not a good example, but I think you will agree with me that much of the pain we suffer from, physical pain we suffer from, is redundant. That's why we take painkiller. Okay, that's
with its pain, like extreme trauma is super rare in the surviving evolutionary history. So our bodies behave suboptimally in extreme trauma, because if some extreme trauma happened to our ancestors,
they didn't survive, so it didn't matter how the pain scaled with the extensity of the trauma. This is like, I think the example is good because like nobody survived having both of their legs broken. So how the body reacts is a complete byproduct of what the pain is fine-tuned to, like to avoid dangerous situations. Like when you touch a stove, this is the pain that your body is optimized to.
And moreover, there is a threshold in the amount of pain, so to say, that extreme injuries are not more painful than just small injuries. So there is an obvious threshold. I hope you didn't experience that, but if you experience it, you know.
The evolution doesn't care about the unpleasant periods, so as you can have kills, effects. So I'd like to ask about the evolutionary mechanism. So if I accept high offer, I'm to be generating externality to others, positive externality to others, unless the offers are conditioned on the identity of the individual. So I would expect that, like in the evolution, people would try to accept low offer because they would free ride on people who would accept high offers, if it makes sense. So
that's why there is more delicate issue about how you transmit your commitment. Okay, I'm going to talk. Okay, whether you can lie or not. Okay, you say I'm not going to accept low offers. I mean, to what extent you can lie? And that's what I'm going to have an experiment that.
So there is a good experiment with the game of scissors, paper.
That's a wonderful example.
Because I usually, when I do it, I declare at the beginning, I will give scissors.
Yeah, but not only that, not only that.
Now, what is the reaction?
Even if you don't declare it,
no, I will
that they are.
I will do, and then it's on me what I will somehow. Yeah. But I will say, okay, I give scissors.
But the fact that people can become champions in this game, there are champions in this game, suggests that there is a lot of information transmitted.
I think that you can, like in the automatic game, like you can derive like different like rational outcomes, like either from like open source game theory, which is a game theory apart, like assuming like you have some access to the kind of code or the strategy of the operator, or from like functional decision theory, which also assumes you are kind of making a decision on behalf of some large market agents. So will this have like after this?
That would connect with definitely or delegation ideas, right? With delegation. Okay, but the important line here, the second line, is that the departure from rationality is not arbitrary, but contains some long-term strategic advantage, and that this self-interest aspect is exercised through strategic commitment. Strategic commitment is an important element of this theory, and strategic commitment refers to situation in which you can gain a certain advantage by tying your hands behind your back, right? Like there are historians here that would confirm stories that I heard from other historians about the Roman legions, right? That used when they crossed the Rhine River, chasing after the German tribes, they used to burn the bridges behind them. And the purpose of burning the bridges is like constraining, it's reducing your opportunities, but it's a commitment. If I burn the bridges, I have no way back, and if I have no way back, you should surrender, because I'm going to fight to death. Bargaining is a very nice example coming from psychologists. I think 50 years back in California, I don't remember exactly, where they generate situation in which they divide the subjects into pairs, give them some money, describe a certain situation and ask them, bargain over how to divide this money and come back to us after 20 minutes. But before they put them into the lab, they intrigue some of them to be more angry than usual. This is usually done by asking people to write down in detail the most annoying event that took place in your life in the last 2 years, right? And they bring them into the lab, and what they found out that those that enter the lab with a higher level of anger leave the lab with a higher level of money, right? Okay, so anger actually helps, and the way it helps is by means of commitment. So saying, you know, I'm not going to accept it, and this is humiliating. I'm going to come and leave the place, and that helps you. That helps. So that's the aspect of commitment. Of course, the question is how it may credible. Okay.
How this emotion as anger is transmitted in the lab to is it articulated or just
by body cues? I'll have that's where I'm going to use this to give an example how emotions are being transmitted, whether it's transmitted or not. But now let's go to a model, and this model is about making preferences. Remember that I'm talking about game theory, so I'm not talking about pain, which is a one-person situation, but about at least two individuals that play. And I'm going to distinguish between material and mental preferences. When people engage in interactions, mental preferences, emotion arise and serve as a commitment device. And the strategic interaction results with the Nash equilibrium. To those who don't know what Nash equilibrium is, it's a situation in which no player has an advantage in unilaterally deviating from what he or she does, right? Think of it as a stability concept, okay? Finally, player mental states must also be in equilibrium. Namely, they have to be best respond to one another, okay? So Nash equilibrium is when I'm doing the best thing for myself, given what you are doing, and you are doing the best thing for yourself, given what I'm doing. Okay, so now there are two requirements here, right? First of all, both of us are choosing mental states, okay? We act according to these mental states. Each of us knows what the mental state of the other.
So I can choose whether I will be angry or generous.
You can choose.
Before I enter bargaining.
Before you enter bargaining.
But it must be my advantage, given your choice of mood, my choice of mood must be also in my financial advantage.
Yeah. Okay, and player can unilaterally, no player can unilaterally change his mental state. This is what Jacob just said. In a way that the new mental state will give rise to a new equilibrium which he or she prefers more. Okay, just for I'll take less than a minute to show the formalism of it. So you have a game, you have a strategy set for each player, you have material utility functions that are denoted capital U, and you have mental utility functions that are denoted by little u's. These are part of your strategies, and the mental equilibrium has two conditions, okay? It's consists of a strategy profile, a strategy for me and a strategy for my partner, and utilities, mental utilities that satisfy these two conditions. Under our mental utility, S is a Nash equilibrium. And secondly, there exists no player I and mental state different than what I have, UI prime, such that if I'm playing UI prime and you maintain your strategy U minus I can make myself better off with respect of my.
This is reminiscent of a literature which was called indirect
utility. This is indirect utility function. What I do here
the fan literature kind of led to a disappointment where it has been discovered that oftentimes I would like to pretend to be angry so that I actually force you to make generous offers. But in fact, not to be angry, because I also want to kind of be in a cold state where I perfectly maximize my interests. And so in the literature, the conclusion was, well, very oftentimes it will be unstable for people to use emotions to manipulate other people.
I don't think that that's the overall conclusion. What differs in my case is that I'm turning it into a general solution concept for games. So I can deal with any games and ask questions about it. And what important, the important aspect with this is, which is not very much was done in the direct evolutionary literature, is to retrieve those preferences, those mental preferences that are part of an equilibrium. So basically answer the question, what should be the mental states of individual to be able to play cooperation in the prisoner's dilemma? And I'll give an answer to this, okay? Yes.
So if I understand correctly, so you can choose mental states, you can choose whether you appear to be angry or not. But I think intuitively, the credibility of anger comes from the fact that I cannot choose it, right? Because if I can strategically choose the mental state, how do I know that the person trusts the genuinity of mine?
Okay, so again, that's something I'm going to talk about, okay? But let's first take this example. This is a prisoner's dilemma, okay? For those who are not familiar with this writing, this is let's focus on this game. Player 1 chooses a row, player 2 chooses a column, and the numbers here are the payoffs. So the left one is player 1 and the right one is player 2. And what you see here, that player 1, no matter what player 2 would do, is better off choosing D, which is the fact. We call it the fact, because 1 is greater than -4 and 5 is greater than 4. Okay? And that applies also for player 2. He would prefer to do D rather than C. And eventually, they will end up with 1-1, okay? Which is a rather bad outcome. They could get the 4-4, okay? And what I'm going to show you is how they manage to succeed playing the 4-4 by means of mental equilibrium, okay? So I have to show you what mental state they're choosing and how they behave under these mental states. And the mental state that they're choosing are given in this matrix, okay? It's very simple. It's the same on the diagonal, but very hard, lots of hardship when they are not coordinated. Either when one chooses to cooperate and the other one chooses to defect, or the other side, okay? So let's see what happens here. Okay, if that's their preferences, and everybody knows it, then 4-4 is an equilibrium, okay? Now, can somebody change in the first stage his mental state and say, well, I'm not cooperating, I'll have a mental state of defect? What would be the consequences? Why would he do something like that to make himself better off in terms of material health? The only material health that would make him better off is 5. He already gets 4. Okay, it's 5. So how can he get 5? He can get 5. Let's say player 1 can get 5 only by if they manage to play this outcome. Okay. Okay. But if his mental state is such that will drive him to play D, obviously the other player will know it. And he will play D as well. So by changing his mental state, he will end up again with 1-1. Okay? Now, the question is, as I told Jacob, what sort of preferences, what are all the preferences that will allow us to sustain cooperation in the prisoner's dilemma? And this is where reciprocity comes in. And there is a definition of reciprocity. Reciprocity means in this context, we're looking at the class of games that are similar to the prisoner's dilemma, that includes tug and hand, and I think that of sexes and which we call conflict game. And within this conflict game, reciprocity means that I would prefer, based on material pair, I would prefer to play C when the other person plays C, and would prefer to play D when the other person prefers D. That's reciprocity, right? I want to cooperate when the other person cooperates, and I don't want to cooperate when the other person is not cooperating, right? And what we can show that for any conflict game.
So those mental states are observable, right? So I cannot, so I have to comment before we start to play this prisoner dilemma, whether I'm a reciprocal type or a nasty selfish type, and you will observe it. So, so I rather be the reciprocal type, because if I'm nasty type, then you will behave in a nasty manner. So I think the problem is the indirect utility approach was that, well, the argument was, why can't we fake it? Why is it not possible for me to have on my hand written in big bold letters, I'm a reciprocal type, so please, let's be reasonable, let's cooperate, because that's what two reciprocal types do. But in fact, I'm a nasty type who will just convince you that I'm reciprocal, and then I will. So you are ruling that out, right? So I'm giving people a commitment device, and the discussion there was that commitment is very hard. That people are good at lying or pretending that they are something else.
So I'm not ruling it out. I'm in all the papers that have this idea, we are allowing players to be able to transmit their true mental states with a certain probability. So we allow noise to be introduced, and depending on the how noisy it is, the equilibrium may change. So we analyze the equilibrium for the basically the whole range.
So, even if the emotions are perfectly credible, they are partially credible. That
so okay. So to summarize it, the basic thing how it deviates from game theory is like the all commitment devices.
Sorry?
Basically all commitment devices.
Yeah, we have commitment devices, yes, but we have specific commitment devices.
Yeah, it's a specific commitment device.
We don't allow, and you'll see that in the next paper we'll have commitment device over beliefs, and in the third one we'll have commitment device over rule of thumbs. Right? Okay, but why we find this result important? Because what it tells us, and there are other results that's I think the most useful aspect of this approach. It tells us, you know, we see things happening in the lab, and we're trying to explain them, right? For instance, we see that people cooperate in the prisoner's dilemma. We can ask, why do people cooperate? We can come up with different explanations. Inequality aversion would lead also, you know, people are inequality averse in these games that I described. They will also play cooperation. If they are altruistic, they care for the other person, they will also get to play cooperation. But what our result says is that to be able to explain cooperation for the entire class of games, okay, only reciprocity will allow you to. So reciprocity is really the most accurate explanation or most relevant explanation among all possible other explanations for why people, and that theoretically you can do for any game that you run in the lab. You can observe how people play, and then you do reverse engineering to ask what sort of mental preferences they should have in order to get precisely this result in the lab. Okay? Any questions?
Yeah, does it have any advantage over open source game theory? Does it have any advantage over open source game theory? If I'm able to like transmit if the strategies of the players are like noisily transparent. Like if I can like If you have two programs, you are able to like see each other's source code.
To some extent, there is, I heard, a similar, it's different than what we are doing, but a similar approach in computer science, which is called, I think, programming equilibrium.
Yeah, programming equilibrium.
That's what you're referring to. So it has similar, but it's used for other purposes. It's used as a mechanism design approach, right? To sustain, okay. Okay, now let's go to beliefs. What are the phenomena that are relevant here? Overconfidence, right? Overconfidence comes from having wrong beliefs, right? Wishful thinking is different than overconfidence. Overconfidence, it has to do with being optimistic about things that I'm responsible, that I can affect, right? That I have a way to manipulate or change, right? Wishful thinking is about optimism of things that have no control whatsoever, okay? Polarization, right? It's about, you know, there's a famous political science experiment when you take people, you give them questions about, let's say, the death penalty or abortion. You ask them to state their position about that. Let's say between 1 and 10, 1 is very much against death penalty, 10 is very much in favor. And then after they made the decisions, you confront them with real evidence about the effectiveness of death penalty. And the real evidence is somewhere in the middle, right? And all of them are experiencing the same evidence. And you would expect that they will converge. If you were 1, you will move to 3. If you were 10, you will move to 8. Instead, you diverge. Okay? And this is how, and obviously, there's something that involves strategic behavior, right? And so it,
because so the polarization also happens in very large societies where I'm a negligible atom of society of 10 million people in Czech Republic. So it doesn't really matter practically, but
what your opinion is.
I'm not really writing laws of these countries, nobody asked me. So to an effect, I'm clear of any strategic considerations that matter. And yet people are very polarized.
Well, because Jakob, what your position about everything is and how it changes, impinges along, as far as other people are concerned, well, who you are, what sort of personality, in particular, how consistent you are with your belief, how serious you are with what you, how easy you are to change your mind, right? So this all gets into the payoff that people get in.
I do not quite understand this example because somehow it depends on how you are presenting this middle case somehow.
Well, all of them.
So I cannot imagine that you are presenting in a somehow unbiased way. So
no, whatever way you present it, everybody gets the same presentation. Yeah, everybody gets the same presentation.
But the presentation is such that everybody can read, somehow can enforce his belief.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
People.
But it depends.
People diverge. The way what caused them to diverge are two things. First of all, screening out all the evidence that are against them and maintaining those that are in favor of their original opinion. And even more serious than that, sometimes interpreting evidence against their opinion to be one that supports their opinion. It's very peculiar.
The ability of then becomes very important against. For example, in this group, probably I should be against that. So we are going to socialize it probably better for me to be against. So this is what I am. I'm against announcing this publicly, but in fact, I'm a vicious fascist, a very rigid person. It's much that's better to maximize the amount of it. Just this is not how I present myself. So how to deal with this? That if it is a social interaction, if people would like to appeal somehow, and I think actually this might be a real issue in social interactions. People are pretty good at pretending.
So what you say that you have a contravailing force, which is conformity, right? Which is
if you say that the effect comes from social interactions, then I may start to worry that those beliefs that are being stated, like 10 and 8 in death penalty scale, are yes, they are not representing rational beliefs and stances, and maybe those rational ones to Jared and deep down,
that's
Bayesian and
this is definitely the case.
But why are this explanation you are somehow coming to believe that you are really
These opinions are, as you say, are very often a tool. That this is what Live and I are talking these days about, right? And trying to put down models for this, including conspiracy theories during COVID about, weird things, that the American government started this, these are tools to socialize.
You then go into the business of modeling these social beliefs, which are kind of presented to the other people, and some internal beliefs, which are the true beliefs. So do you have like?
Well, we are doing here in this paper, that I will talk about. The one that I'm thinking with blood is not yet conceived, but in this paper, what we do is something very simple. Is trying to see how belief can be used as commitment. Okay, it's a commitment device, and to ask questions about, again, what sort of distortions of beliefs, or what sort of environment would give rise to distortions of belief that are, for instance, consistent with wishful thinking. Okay, so I'll define wishful thinking specifically. But before I define it, I like to make stories sometimes in my talk, and this is what, in fact, what drove me to start thinking about it. This is the passport of my grandfather when he escaped Nazi Germany in 1934. He came to, at that time was Palestine under British mandate, and when he left Germany, he was a very, very successful, very rich businessman in East Prussia, in the Königsberg. And he thought he's just coming for a few months until people would take care of this guy called Hitler, and then he would come back. Okay? But that was in 1935. If you were Jewish, you were not allowed to you left to come back to Germany just like that, even if you have a passport, right? You had your passport to be stamped every 6 months to make it valid, okay? And surprising or not, there was a German consulate in Jerusalem during Monday time, okay? And my grandfather would go every 6 months to this consulate, wait in line, okay? Even when there was no line, he would wait in line, right? To get his passport stamped, and you see, and I found in his passport exactly on the each time he would give a new date for the renewal. The last date he got for renewal, which he didn't attend, was December 1938. This was just 1 month after the famous Kristallnacht. And that's where his wishful thinking vanished, right? He said, there's no way, it's not gonna happen, right?
Isn't that conceptualized as an option value? So the things in Germany were uncertain, there was some uncertainty. Standing in the consulate was a bit of a pain, but it's an option to come back.
People were looking at him, I guess, when he was going there, because it was so much inconceivable that he will be able to come back. And he refused to accept it.
So the option value was so low.
I guess, yeah. Now, how do I,
But he was not paying for it, so somehow.
he was paying a lot mentally, emotionally.
No, this I understand, but somehow for the fact going there and somehow, okay, it was unpleasant to stay.
No, it was very unpleasant. It was also, you pay socially. Imagine you are in Israel, you are surrounded by Jews, and you go to the embassy every now and then. You go to the German embassy, the Nazi embassy, and get a stamp with a happy voice. I mean, this is not pleasant. Oh. Okay, so here is a story. Players potentially have biased, distorted belief about their action of the counterpart. So we are very specific here. You only have distorted beliefs. So these are games with conflicting information. So you have distorted beliefs about what the other person is going to do. Okay? Player choose best response based on their distorted belief. Okay? If you are going to play A and I think that you are going to play half-half, I'm distorted. I'm best responding to half-half. Okay? Belief distortions are not arbitrary, but serves players' strategic objective. Okay? The distortion itself, but the distortions themselves function as distortion function are best respond one to another. Okay, I'll give you examples. Okay, so this is the basic model. What is a distortion? A distortion is a function.
You're going to explain, so I think you are heading to explain why people have these biased beliefs.
Yes.
By strategic means. So of course, if we are about to enter a fight, if I can convince you that I believe of myself to be a really strong guy, then maybe you will chicken off. So that might
that's interpreted.
So that's the interpretation. But we know there is a lot of evidence that people have biased beliefs in non-strategic situations. So I'm on my own, I don't interact with something, I'm choosing a product, I'm choosing an insurance, I'm choosing an education for myself.
Okay, so there are
in a lab, this can be very much controlled, and very much in non-strategic situations, and I'm not fooling anybody instead of myself, people exhibit.
Yeah.
Very
so there is a paper of my co-author with some other co-author. Okay, they deal precisely with this issue of overconfidence on event, and I think their explanation is basically that that overconfidence is a way to deal with exaggerated risk aversion. Okay, so you are very risk averse. To the extent that it's not good for you.
It's a corrective device for
it's a corrective device for excessive risk aversion.
I think you can actually, so like my story for this is not published, but I think it's like interesting.
Okay.
So you can get like hyperbolic discounting from like uncertainty over risk rate. Like if you are uncertain over risk rate, like you get something like hyperbolic discounting. But like you can compensate hyperbolic discounting by overconfidence, and like you get like actually sort of optimal behavior because you can like cancel out the things.
Interesting. Okay, so again, a distortion is a function that maps my partner's strategies to my partner's strategies, right? To a mixed strategy of my partner, to a different mixed strategy of my partner. So what I do, we first choose or endow with, that's a better term, with distortion beliefs, and then act according to them. Then we require that the distortion belief, so based on our distortion belief, we look at the Nash equilibrium, set of Nash equilibrium. And then we require that there is no player who can change his or her distorted belief in such a way that it will breed an equilibrium which he or she prefers based on his preference. By the way, we have other concept of equilibrium there. For instance, a different one which is a stronger, yes?
So like in your previous case, you are giving people a commitment device. So you are going to randomize your behavior. I'm responding to that. And I commit to seeing the proportions of you playing this strategy over that strategy subjectively. And that in the follow-up strategic interaction will change your behavior.
Yeah.
But I can commit to having subjective beliefs about your behavior.
Yeah. You act according to these subjective beliefs.
Right, and you know it in advance. And this is what your sources do.
Yeah.
Again,
Okay, so one way to interpret it is, I'm telling you, listen, Jacob, I'm a good chess player. You should take care to play with me. By the way, I'm an awful one. But so the idea is that to make it credible, and this is to make it credible, I need to believe it. So there are internal mechanisms by which I would be forced to believe it.
But it must be visible to the opponent.
And not only that, it will be visible to my opponent only if I'm genuinely believing. Okay? And maybe I'll say something about it. It's very hard to get into this mechanism formally using game theory. So we are leaving it more to the interpretation and intuition. But we have some experiments that okay. So now I have to show you what is wishful thinking. Wishful thinking is basically an equilibrium is wishful thinking if what's written here, if based on my distortion, whatever the other party is doing based on my distortion, I think I'm better off than reality. Okay, I'm too optimistic. Okay, so this is and we identify strategic situations. I won't get into but prominently situation of strategic complementarity of supermodular game, where equilibrium breeds wishful thinking. Basically think of situation in which the more it's also not only so let's think about situation in which there is some public good, and the more I contribute, the more willing you will be to contribute. There's some complementarity in our contributions.
Well, I benefit from boosting.
So I'm benefiting from being optimistic. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. I contribute more, and you know that I'm optimistic. You contribute more. Okay. Okay. So these are situations that basically need to. I'm going to skip these.
But surely you can find games where
the
belief distortion would be beneficial in the opposite direction.
There are games which is the opposite direction. Yeah.
That will be testable.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. When do I have to finish? I want to plan my time.
I think you still have 1 hour.
Oh, that's
because we are discussing too.
Okay. So rule rationality. Okay, let me explain to you. This was actually motivated by a paper by Bob Aumann, who published in Nature several years ago. And his idea was that his idea was the criticism of behavioral economics as claiming, so his idea was what I described to you about the ultimatum game. I think this is one of the examples that he's giving there. And he said, these biases are coming from basically bounded rationality, limits on computation, or limits on being able to analyze situations. So we can't analyze each game separately, and therefore this was like it was no one formula in the paper, nothing, no mathematics whatsoever. It was only sort of philosophical question, philosophical paper. And he said many of the biases that exist in behavioral economics are prominent, are shown on a very very specific setup, which is unnatural. And we can argue about all these things. But as a general trait, as a general, they're beneficial. They help us make correct decisions, right? Under these specific constraints that we experience in computational ability. Okay. So what we wanted to do are two things. First, to formulate this idea of rule in game theory, rationality, and secondly, to show that you don't, to get rule rationality, you don't need to have cognitive constraint. You may have it even if you are totally unconstrained, just because of the benefits of committing. Okay, so let me tell you how we modeled it. So the idea is we have an environment. Environment is a set of games, class of games. Let's start to think about them all with identical number of strategies. Okay, so player one has the same number of strategies in all the game, and player two has the same number of strategies in all these games. Okay, but they differ in terms of payoffs. And there is some probability distribution over these games. So these should be interpreted as the games you experience through life. You gain experience from playing them. Okay? Okay. What is rule? A rule is a partition of these games. Right? A rule means that certain games I treat in the same game, in the same way. Okay? So if I'm partitioning the set of games into classes, this would mean that I'm bound to play the same strategy within each class of the partition. Okay? I can change my strategy when I move to a different component, but within each component, I have to use the same partition. Okay? So what the players are doing is first they form these rules, this partitioning, and each of us see the partition of the other person. Okay, I'll give you an example. There are better mechanisms here. I'll give you some examples. And then each of us uses a strategy which is measurable with respect to the partition, right? Namely, with the same component, we use the same strategy. Okay? And these strategies have to be in Nash equilibrium. Okay? Furthermore, the partitions themselves have to be best respond to one. It's very similar to the approach we had before. Okay?
So for every game, each player has the same number of strategies, but the cross games, what do you mean same strategy?
So I'll explain. So I'll jump these and I will explain here. I'll get into these examples.
First, classify all the remaining lives into categories, and then within each
category, you have to use the same strategy.
treat all these games in that given category as being the same.
You treat all these games within category being the same.
I would expect, I mean, that this would lead to a huge multiplicity of possible equilibria of categorization. This is very self-fulfilling.
Not necessarily, but sometimes, yes, not necessarily. Sometimes it will do. Yes.
For example, in a particular game, there's some strategy that's not available in other games.
No, so that's why I said all the games have the same sets of strategies for the players. Okay. I can also accommodate your framework by having redundant strategies, adding redundant strategies. That's not a problem. But for simplicity, we assume, like here, you see there are two states, okay? Two games, okay? Let's say there are 50-50 chance that you experience each one of them, okay? And you can choose one of two partitions, either to separate between these two games or to commit to use the same strategy on them both. Okay? Now note that these two games, one of them is the prisoner's dilemma, the same prisoner's dilemma we saw earlier, but with different payoff. And the other one is a stag and hunt game, okay? The stag and hunt game has two equilibria. Cooperation is in equilibrium, unlike the prisoner's dilemma, but also the fact is in equilibrium. Look, these games are quite similar. It's only that on the diagonal we have, instead of 9.5, we have 8.5. Okay? Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, so the players like observe the partitions.
They observe the partitions.
So again,
okay. So now I'm going to show you. So suppose that we are both what we call act rational people. Okay, act rational meaning playing Nash equilibrium on each game separate. We can distinguish between these games. Okay. Then in the best case scenario, we would earn on average 5 each, right? Because in the best case scenario, we would play the 9-9 here. We would play the 1-1 here. That's the only equilibrium in the prisoner's dilemma. On average, we would get 5. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you how rule rational individuals would jointly gain out of having rule. And the rule is very simple. The rule says, I'm not going to distinguish between these two games. I'm just going to look at the other person, whether he distinguishes them or not. If he doesn't distinguish it between the two like I do, I'm going to play C, cooperate. If, however, I see that he's going to play differently, I see that his partition is the single tone, then I'm going to play D. Okay? So let's see that this is an equilibrium based on this model. First of all, what do we gain if player play this path of equilibrium? They play 9-9 here and 9-9 here. They get 9-9 on average, much more. Okay. Now the issue here, should I deviate and play the best thing in each game separately? How can you gain by ignoring information? Okay. The answer is no, because given the fact that the other person would know that you distinguish these two games, he would play the fact. Okay. And listen, what is the best thing you can do? Given that he plays the fact, if you're playing 1, is
so at the example stage, those players have to have some ability to distinguish between the two games, just to go over the reasoning that I've just mentioned. So suppose I am a guy who is just scores, and I do not distinguish between stake and prisoner's dilemma. I just know I don't see a difference between those two games. Then I would not be able to react. So if you are a guy who can choose whether to distinguish or not, if I just do not have the ability to distinguish,
that's a good point. That's a good point.
You would deviate, you would distinguish, and
that's a good point. My answer to this would be that
There's like a mental phrase, and you're very smart.
Yeah, no, your smartness doesn't have to be mathematical smartness, but social smartness, right? Social intelligence, right? Or emotional intelligence. You would, these games looks very complex to you, right? And you are let's say the naive guy, right? But you sense that the other person is too strategic, right? You sense that the other person is too strategic. That would, so you don't.
We do in our favor. We do oftentimes argue in social situations by drawing analogies. I would say this particular war is very similar to that war, and therefore we should do the same thing.
Yeah. So that
the other war.
No.
That sounds like trying to communicate those partitions.
Exactly. So what and what I mean by social learning is that you experience this situation lots of times. You can't analyze this game, okay? But you gain some experience in the fact that when your counterpart is too strategic and that he thinks too much on this game, right? And eventually, when you play C, you are worse off than playing D. Okay, so that's enough. So indeed, this part, in all these papers, this part of acquiring preferences, mental preferences, or distorted beliefs or rules, this part of the model, we view it as some sort of a long-term experience, as opposed to the choosing of the strategies which are short-term, which are specific, concern situation. Okay?
I think it's again basically a special case of program equilibrium. Like if you are able to like understand something about the program like you are running against, like you can basically to some extent like recognize whether the other party, if the programs are like mostly transparent, like you can kind of like deal with like all the like okay, if the other program is like running some computation which you don't understand at all because it's a fine game, like you would detect for like self-projection or something like that. So I think like what these become is like program equilibrium.
I can tell you that many people who are familiar with this literature have seen this paper and could not really make the exact match between these two concepts. But I think what I believe is applies in both concepts is the idea of commitment. Yes.
So is there an assumption that there's an objective description of the game? Because in reality, it may be like difficult to identify what game they're playing because there are different framings. And I don't know who are the players, who does it.
That's a very good question. That's something that's a big hole in game theory in general. We have very fancy models of games with incomplete information, right? That people don't know, but still, they also require an extent of knowledge of the environment, which is unrealistic, even incomplete games, even incomplete information games. Usually they're more specific to a specific environment. You just have incomplete information in one aspect. This is something that is very hard to generalize. Unfortunately, but there are efforts to it. Okay, let me just say what we show here. Again, I mean, we characterize partitions. The important thing is to characterize partitions. And one, I think, very attractive result that we have in this paper. And it connects to multiplicity that Jakob mentioned. is that we can sustain if there are, if all the games are identical, right? All the games are identical. Then the question is, what sort of solution concept you get on this game, which is repeat itself over the entire environment? And the answer to this is roughly you get correlated equilibrium. Okay, so that's reinstalls, this concept reinstalls the idea of correlated equilibrium. But so it does give you an interpretation of how correlated equilibrium might be played, right? Basically playing them, but there is a signal up there. There is a signal. So think of these games, but they are all in different colors. One is green, one is red. These colors are irrelevant whatsoever, right? But we say, you know, I treat all the cold colors identically, right? That means green, blue, and all the warm colors identically. That would generate a device, a coordination device by which we can play those outcomes which are preferable to both of us, and we cannot sustain by Nash equilibrium.
I like to ask about these partitions. So, like, intuitively, so I would say, okay, so let's say I don't distinguish any games, and it's costly to distinguish different types of games. So there's certain costs to look into like what kind of situation it is and so on. And I would compare it to the payoffs I can gain by distinguishing between these types of games. So is it like, are the partitions endogenous in a sense that I compare the cost of distinguishing the games with the payoffs I can get?
This is free. That's why we say, that's what we say. That's what we say. You can get partitions in equilibrium even if you have no cognitive constraints.
And the differences in payoffs also do not matter. So they are huge.
No,
they don't.
So one of the, as I said, one of the purposes of this paper was to show that you can get these. In fact, we have examples in which we don't even have act-based equilibrium. Act-based equilibrium, act-rational equilibrium is when you would play rationally, which in each game separately. You would think that every game would have such sort of bubbling equilibrium, right? That we both know that we distinguish, and that's if we both know that each other distinguish between all the games, that there is no way to form.
If it solves business element in this way, I tell you, I'm gonna cooperate in business element for confusion because I will just not distinguish it from another game, as long as you will reciprocate that confusion. That's what the business element. Reciprocal confusion.
I think one aspect, one real life aspect that I attribute to such behavior is kosher rules. Kosher rules exist in Judaism, but not only in Judaism, also exist in Islam, not very much in Christianity. But as far as kosher rules in Jewish culture, these rules became way more restrictive over the years. Okay, and especially during diaspora, during Middle Ages and early modern time, they became more restrictive. I mean, in the Bible, the restriction is basically, one of the restrictions is not to eat meat of Bill, the baby of a cow, together with his mother-owned milk. Okay, those are very unlikely events to happen, right? And then it was restricted more and more until today. You are not allowed to eat chicken with milk. Right? Chicken don't have any milk. Okay. And the way it was restricted is by making the rules coarser and coarser. Yeah. Why wasn't there a need to make the rule coarser? Okay. It's a rule, right? Because you say all of these meats are identical. I don't distinguish between them, right? They are all the same for me, okay? And the reason was strategic, but not in a standard strategic way, but in a social way. Right? These rules were a way to constrain Jewish people to eat together, to maintain the community, right? And not be lured to eat with people who are not Jewish and then, God forbid, convert yourself to Christianity. Okay, so you had to maintain the community. Okay, so you could have a rule that said you can have a coarser rule that said you're not allowed to eat with a non-Jewish person on the same table, right? But that would be too strict rule to abide to, right? Because you have, sometimes you are compelled to write a contract with somebody, you need to sit and have dinner with the person, right? So culture designed an optimal partition to some extent, which is we're going to allow you to eat with other people who are not Jewish, but we're not going to make it difficult for you. Those dishes that they like the most are going to be banned by us, right? This is a commitment device. This is showing your peers within the community that by saying, I'm observing, I'm keeping kosher, saying I'm compelled to eat with you. It's more often than I eat outside.
Maybe it's the same with like current cultural scene and veganism.
So this is an experiment that we do based on this idea. And look at these three environments. The first one is pure coordination game. Okay, there is evidently a lot of interest for both of us not to choose the partitioning that bundle these two games together. This is where we have a lot of interest, right? A lot of interest to say, I don't care which game is played, right? Because these are played with probability 50%. So with probability 50%, I get 9, and with probability 50%, I get -1, okay? So we say, we don't care which game is played, we play A, okay? And there's no reason to. And this one is somewhere between. It's a prisoner's dilemma here, but it's a pure coordination here. So they're mixed reasons to either choose one or the other. And what we found out is that people behave consistently with this ranking that I described to you. Although evidently, this is now applies this for games and economic behavior. What I find interesting is these are the percentage of cases in which people ask the information. So how we did this experiment? We told people one of these games is going to be played. Okay, you can choose to get the information which game is played, and then your partner will know it. Or you tell us that you give it up. Okay, and then we play the game. Okay, it turns out that there are differences, but a vast majority, except for game 2, which is the one that really calls for not taking the information, chooses to take the information, right? And I think this is also because avoiding information, foregoing information is a very free information. You don't pay for it, right? And you say to yourself, who cares? It's very uncommon that you're asked the information and say, no, sorry, I don't want to know the information. There are papers on that as well, more psychological papers, where people avoid taking information even without strategic environment. And this is why there is a very large proportion of people choosing the information, even in environment.
Yes. Yeah. So for the first environment, like in your experiment, so for the like a pure coordination game, just A and B, it's just a relabeling of strategies. So I would think like in reality, like
which environment 2 you
one.
Environment 1.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's just a relabel 1 and 2, A and B.
That's
right? Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they are. I mean, I can think about this like the same environment, but just the strategy is the same. I mean, it's exactly identical game, but it relabel the strategy.
Yeah. So it has to be that strategy has some, it's more, it have some meaning, some like choosing to go to a movie or not to go to a movie. There's some semantic in there to make it
So they could check correctly that most participants didn't figure out that bundling Prisoner's Dilemma with coordination the game is a good idea, so they didn't use the management that we offered them.
In fact, you have in this third environment, you have both types of equilibrium. You have equilibrium which people take.
But one is culturally more efficient.
Yes.
So
people
more efficient equilibrium would actually not distinguish those two games, and people literally took the information.
So I understand that you're focusing on the types of strategic situations, right? And does the result depend on the magnitude of payoffs? Like if I would change, like instead of having 10, having 20 or something?
It shouldn't. If the game, if the game is strategically equivalent, right? It should. But how it would play out in the lab is not clear. There's also questions about, for instance, ultimatum bargaining. Many people raise this question about, if you pay 100 euro, you may say no to 30. If I offer you 300,000 euro out of a million, then maybe you will say yes, right? So not all these games are invariant to strategically equivalent transformation. So lastly is the idea of categorical thinking. And this is basically the idea, I'm doing with Joe Halpern, who is a computer scientist from Cornell, and again, Yuval, who is at Bar-Ilan University. The idea here is to ask questions about how people portion their utility function. Okay, so people may not distinguish, or may not only not distinguish, but also reveal that they don't distinguish between payoffs that, for instance, are small difference, right? Say, I'm not going to argue with you on $10. That $10 is not an issue, right? So this type of so on. And the reason we were thinking about it is that we wanted to somehow see the role, of language in a game theoretic idea. So language is when you are bounded to express your attitude towards outcomes of the game by very limited vocabulary. Okay, So this is acceptable, this is unacceptable, this is okay, okay? So you have a range of vocabulary, you have a range of expressions, and people act according to these expressions, and what we wanted to do is to show how this affect what we found there. This is now revised for chat, and when we have to still do some work there. We are in the middle of the revision for the journal, but basically what we show is that for instance, strategic complement would get us over investment. So we are looking. One type of a game when we look at our investment games, right? That you put something, I put something, and some sort of public good game. And complementarity, this force utility function would give us over investment, and strategic substitution would give us under investment. I won't get too much into it. Let me just ask a riddle. I showed you lots of models. Does anyone can guess what type of games these type of commitment will not play a role? There are type of games that basically will get the same thing with all these solution concepts as if you used start on duct equilibrium. Usually these concepts are coarsened. They yield the largest set than Nash equilibrium, but there are cases in which you'll get exactly Nash equilibrium. And these cases are when you play zero-sum games, okay? Right? When your interest is totally opposite than your interest. Why is that? And I think this is a simple and important insight, is that in zero-sum games, commitment plays no role. What is commitment? Commitment is when I tell you, listen, I don't want you to do this thing. And therefore I'm going to threaten you by doing something which will be, that eventually will make me better off. I'm pushing you to do something else which will basically will make me better. But if I'm pushing you to do something else that will make me better off, it will clearly make you worse off. So I have no way, I have no instrument by which to distort your preferences in a way that will, threaten in a way that you'll do something better for me. Because we have a complete opposite.
So there is no benefit of cooperation, basically.
Sorry?
There is no benefit of
There is no
cooperation.
benefit of,
Is it true also for like zero-sum games of more players? Because I guess commitment device is more again. Like if I can commit to cooperating with someone, I think before that is not zero-sum.
it's not a zero-sum game.
It's commitment.
This applies to all constant sum games. So basically, every game that in which our interests are totally opposite.
Is there an empirical stylized fact that would say that the natural predictions work better in zero-sum game as opposed to general class of games? Do we have a feeling that the natural prediction was predictive of real behavior in zero-sum games rather successfully?
This could be, however, to have a claim like this shown. In an environment where you have mixed strategy.
Difficult because of mixed.
It's difficult because of mixed strategy. Okay. This I said. Now I want to we talk a little bit about experiments, the two experiments that are relevant to this. So for these ideas to make sense, there are the two things. One of them is the idea that emotions, when I'm talking about the preferences of emotions, are contextual and can be to some extent synthesized. Yeah, that's why I call synthesized emotion. Now, this idea of synthesizing emotion is known very well to actors. So if you ask an actor,
produced specifically on purpose.
Yes. If you ask an actor how he or she gets to weep, cry on stage when the scene requires it, right? They will tell you that how do you imitate? How do you with tears? How do you generate the tears, right? They will tell you that they're not imitating; they actually cry. And you ask them, so the basic idea is to reflect, like what I said. This experiment, get somebody to be angry by writing down an event. They so reflect on an event in their own life, which connect somehow to the scene that is on stage. It has to be something that connects to what you do, right? And this brings you, this gets you, you really get into the state of mind of feeling that you need to cry, okay? And what we wanted to do is to test it in the lab, and I partner with people who are neuroscientists, and we used other than MRI and other technique, they use also skin conductance. Skin conductance is a machine. It's basically lie detector. Okay, the electrodes are connected to the hand and head. What it measures two things. It measures the conductance of the body, which is the amount of sweat that the body produces. And sweat is correlated with emotions, arousal, and heartbeats. And it's done very, it's doing skin conductance, you have to be, that's something that it would take me months to study how to analyze the data. So this is something, what we did is we generated an environment, we generated 3 environments. And in all these environments, there were 2 individuals playing a certain game. And you could be treated well in this game by the other party, or you could be treated badly, right? And in the first environment, we called it anger, okay? We told people, if you we have a way to measure your emotional reaction. If you found out that you were angry by the fact that you were treated badly by your counterpart, we're going to compensate you. Okay? In the second one, we called happy. We told people, if we find out that you were happy with the fact that your counterpart treated you well, we're going to compensate you. And the third one was neutral, right? The control group, where we said we have a way to measure your emotional reaction, but that's not going to affect your parent. Okay? And then we also asked them. Okay, so what you see here, low offer is being treated badly, and high offer is being treated well. And what you see is this is the emotional reaction measure. Okay. If you were incentivized, you reacted to bad offers Very prominent. Very prominent. If you were not incentivized, even if you got nothing in August, if you got nothing, your no offer didn't matter so much. Right? It's also interesting that it's hard to synthesize emotion without any context. If you were treated well and we tell you you'll be given more money if you are angry, it's hard to generate. You have to have a grain of truth in your emotional reaction. So this is prominent. You see, this is also consistent with what people actually said later. I don't know, this is aptitude, this is heartbeat. So these are two different ways to measure which are consistent. Yes, but we are also asking at the end of the experiment, what did you feel about the way you were treated? And what people said, we didn't want to rely on that because people would may give us distorted messages, but we found out that this confirmed what we actually so emotion can be synthesized, but to a certain degree. But I think for many of us, this is something. I don't know. The culture plays a role in. But for instance, the example that I say, usually people manage to identify with is suppose that you will find yourself in an airport and you were told that your flight was canceled, and you see people around you. And let's think about two scenarios. In scenario A, you see people very apathic about this situation. They browse their smartphone, they start packing their stuff, and they're told that there are buses taking them to the hotel that is waiting outside. You looking around you, you'll see you most likely won't feel angry. You may feel disappointed or something. But now think about the different scenario in which people show less acceptance to the situation, and you come across a friend of you who tell you, listen, I went to the desk of the airline and I on the table and said, I'm not going to accept this as a treatment to customers. And if you don't reroute me to a different flight, I'm going to sue the company. And I raised my voice a little bit, and sure enough, they rerouted me to a different airline, and I'm going to be back home in several hours. Okay, there, your emotional reaction will be totally different. You're more likely to be angry. And the reason you're more likely to be angry is that you see an opportunity here for your anger to be instrumental.
This was a very instrumental reason why we want to mimic the emotional reflex. Now we do know that emotions are very contagious whenever we live.
That's true.
I mean, maybe they are so contagious one can speculate that this is beyond the instrumental value of making the emotion.
Could be.
You have some speculations about why are emotions so contagious?
Emotions are contagious.
Beyond the instrumental, so I can see now if Marek is pretty happy and maybe there is a reason, or maybe Marek has a benefit for it, so I will just copy it. That's an instrumental story. But I think we do it beyond the instrumental.
I think by the way, I have a general reader's book that deals with much of these quotes. Feeling smart, and is translated to several languages already, but one of the chapter, it doesn't belong to this lecture. One of the chapter there's called collective emotions, and I try to explain. I don't know if you've seen. There are famous pictures after the death of what's the name of the North Korean leader? The one who died. Yeah. And see hundreds of people really weeping hysterically, right? And it's laughable. But if you ask yourself, are these people really crying? And I would say, yeah, they're crying. They really feel terrible. Okay, and they feel terrible because of the.
That can be also very instrumental.
That's what we also survive. But beyond that, I'll give you another example that I tell in the book. That my father told me. It was the child during early Nazism in 1933 before he left. And you remember an uncle of his knocking at the door and was very excited. He was supposed to come and visit them, but he was looking very badly. And he was sick and said, I have to relax. And he was asked, what has happened? And he said that there was an assembly of the Nazi party here in the square, not far from here, and Hitler came by and gave a speech. And, you know, just of curiosity, I joined what he's saying. And I found myself fully captured by him, right? To the extent that I raised my hand with everybody and said, Hi Hitler, Hi Hitler. Okay? And this was a genuine, I think what I explain in the book for the sources of it is that it's a social mechanism, evolutionary social mechanism that demonstrates commitment. Okay, by us sharing emotions, we're actually signing an implicit contract that we have a lot between us.
Well, it does mitigate conflicts. It does mitigate conflicts. So if my emotions are automatically
mitigates conflict, and these conflicts are also generated by the role by commitment. So the fact that part of our bonding and joint commitment to support and protect each other is having this enemy outside. Right? This enemy, sometimes we create him artificially, right? Create this enemy artificially just to strengthen the bonding, this virtual bonding that apparently we need very much as human beings.
That there is a special term for this triangulation.
Yeah.
Also, like gossiping works in a similar way. Like two people meet and gossip about the third person, and they are like bonding.
How many? I
10 minutes.
I will not take more than 10 minutes, but I'm going to show two research outcomes concerning this. One of ours and one of other people. What we did was published in Science. Is we did experiment by taking, there are many episodes like this, and we took lots of students, and we asked them to make prediction, like I asked you, okay? After these 30 seconds, okay? And we did it in two environment. I don't know if you know this hormone called oxytocin, which is known to generate bonding, but also there are evidence that generate trust. We did it first without oxytocin, and we found out that people make prediction, in spite of the fact that they're not part of this environment, of this interaction. They make prediction which are better than just guessing. Okay, so people have some positive probability in this. What we also found is that oxytocin has a negative effect on being able to predict, which is consistent with the role of oxytocin based on other papers that generate trust, because when is it that you want to really look at somebody's face and see whether he or she is lying? It's when you are suspicious about the person, not when you trust them. When you trust them, it becomes annoying to some extent, or more costly, mentally costly, to figure out what the intentions of others. And this is really the difference that we found between those who took the oxytocin and those who took the placebo. The difference was in the time they spent to making these guesses. Those who took the oxytocin decided immediately. They didn't want to engage in this task of getting into people, social cues, how the body is moving, how the face, what the facial expression. They made very fast decisions. The other,
using this clip, and I was teaching in a business in the US, and the students were very good at guessing who is gonna do what, much better than you guys.
And the other fire, which is not us,
You have more oxytocin now.
but this is the finding that the two papers, Ehud Kalai and Adam Kalai, these are father and son, both game theorists. They looked at many episodes like this, and they asked the question, this is still, this is split, still, split. And they asked the questions, let's look at the distribution of the joint distribution over these 4 outcomes, okay? If I know nothing about what you do, this should be a product distribution. Namely, yes. What they found out that much of the mass of the distribution is around the diagonal. Okay? It's around the diagonal. Namely, people typically, when they are capable to some degree of verifying whether the other person is going to play split or steal. And if I know that you're going to play split, I will probably play split as well. If I know that you're going to play steal, why should I give you all the money? I'm going to be venturous and play steal as well.
I think in this context, it is not typical prisoner's dilemma without repetition. Because if I play this game, I would also split. Because if the person steals, if we both steal, then the television, the third party keeps the money. But if one of us cooperates, at least one of us cooperates, the money are allocated somewhere in this dyad, and I have other means how to persuade them, like, come on, give me at least 1/3, because I did this conscious decision and you are an asshole, because if I did the same, the television would keep the money. So I think the rational decision here is always split.
Not only that, but I think this girl, I would anticipate she would have problems getting a job. Consequences beyond the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much. I'll stop here.